Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Welcome to Coffee Time Career Chat. My name is Patricia Hayes, and I am your executive advisor, career empowerment coach, and authentic networking strategist. That means I love working with people who are trying to up level themselves personally and professionally, and to be more empowered along the way, and to make sure that they leverage their professional relationships in an authentic way as they seek to achieve their long-term goals and to make those relationships sustainable. So, welcome if this is your first time. Look forward to engaging with you. Make sure you got your coffee in your hand. And we're going to jump in today because we are talking about personal accountability. And in terms of working with our professional, career, our goals, our business, all of that stuff. And I thought this topic was appropriate right now because, we're starting the second quarter of the year, and we are, in that springtime, new things, new opportunities. And so it's always good to kind of do a quick refresher and some reminders about some things, right? To keep us on track with the goals, the dreams, the projects, all of that stuff. And accountability is a huge part of making sure that those things happen. So we're going to talk about that today in terms of the commitments that it requires and why it matters. Okay. All right. So that said, you know how I am. We have to start off by laying the groundwork of the basic definition so that we're on the same page. And so when you go look up what accountability means or how it's defined, it talks about first as there being an obligation, which is always very interesting to me. So there's some type of obligation. Or secondarily, there's a willingness to accept a responsibility for one's own actions. So when we're looking at that and thinking about that, let's divide that up into the two parts, right? The first one is an obligation. So that means there's something that you have either committed to or gotten committed to, probably something work related, or it could be a volunteer, something, anything like that. But it makes it so that you are now officially obligated in some way, and there's some expectations for you to engage, to deliver, to participate in some way. The second half of that takes on from the first one being more external coming in, the second one being more internal going out, which is the willingness to accept the responsibility for your actions. Now, can there be an overlap between the two? Absolutely. But in terms of looking at those things where we have accountability because of something externally that's going on, and that's quote placed upon us, versus something that is being motivated from within to willingly step into the responsibility. And absolutely, they can overlap. We're all the time in our work, in our profession, in our business. Okay. So I want you to think about that. The question is, where are you stepping in to take on some additional responsibility for an action, for a role? Where are you stepping in to be more accountable? And that's a question I want you to reflect on and think about, not just today, but moving forward as you decide on the activities you're engaging for this quarter and for the rest of the year, and really being conscientious about what it means to take on the responsibility for whatever actions, activities, projects, all of that you're engaging in. And then taking a look at the 4 levels of commitment that are involved there, and so that you can decide actively if this is something you want to do, right? Or that you're willing to do, or that you make sure you're aware of in terms of, like, let's say if it's a new job or a new business venture, all right? And so the 4 commitments. The first one is I'm laying out as a commitment to a goal. And when you are committed to a goal, most of the time it's not something that's, over and done with, in 24 hours. Generally, there's some type of longer term commitment. Now, how you define long term absolutely depends on the situation and what it is you're working with. But the point is, it's not haphazard, it's not random. Like, there requires some follow through. And when you're doing that, it can get a little dicey because you can be committed to the idea of the goal, the idea of the thing at the end that you get, but get a little shaky on the steps that it takes and the process that it takes to achieve that goal. And we have to realize that, the idea of the end goal and the process are two different things, right? I have to write that down because that was a newbie. That was not something that I had thought of originally. But those are two different things. And they're both required when you're thinking about what's your obligation, what's the responsibility that you're accepting and moving toward it. And the idea of the goal is because you have to believe in that, right? It means that there's something that hasn't been achieved yet. And so you either get inspiration from it, you're motivated by it. So yes, you do have to be committed to the idea of the goal, but you also have to be committed to the process and what it's going to take to actually achieve the goal. And those are that two-parter that has to be joined when you're thinking about whether you are really all in and willing to be accountable for the, whatever the goal is, and for whom it's for, right? Whether it's for work, whether it's for yourself, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or whatever that may be. So that's that first one. You have to be, it requires a commitment to the goal. And remember, it's a two-part thing. The idea of the goal, what's inspiring you, as well as the actual process and the actions that it's going to require. All right. The second one is having a commitment to growth. I love this one because when we're talking about being accountable and being responsible for something, a lot of times what we're not thinking about is the growth that's going to be required along the way as well. And that can be uncomfortable, right? Because there are going to be some challenges, which we'll talk about next. But here's the thing, good or bad, you have to be willing to grow from the experiences that you're having. So if they're failed experiences, you have to be willing to grow for them. If they're successful experiences, you have to be willing to grow for them. And the reality is, a lot of times people think or assume that you grow more from success when it's actually the flip. You grow more from the stuff that you fail from. Ask anyone, it's like all of the lessons that are learned when you have an experience that is not so great. A lot of times there are things that you learn so much more at greater depth. But it not that there's greater value one way or the other, but it's the realization that when you want to ignore or put something behind you because it didn't succeed, in reality, you want to probably step back and really dive into more why it didn't succeed so that you can learn from it and embody it as you move forward and as you honor the commitment to the overall project, experience, career, whatever it is. Okay. So recognize that there is a commitment to growth that is a part of being accountable when you are honoring an obligation, when you're honoring something that you've taken on some responsibility for. Don't forget the growth piece of it. Now, here's the thing. learning, I feel strongly about it. Learning is required from, when there's a growth process. You can either learn actively or you can learn, the hard way. But generally, there are going to be some lessons learned. But they become, I won't say better, but they help facilitate that growth faster when you are actively involved in it, when you are willing to be aware of the situation. And for leaders, for those of you who are leaders, not just people who are managers or have a title, but if you are really in a position of influence where people are trusting you to lead them through a process, through a project, to lead in some capacity, and you want that to be sustainable, that growth is something that you can then pass on to the folks that you are leading. And that kind of feeds that. It teaches them how to be accountable within the organization, within the team, within the project. And there are lessons that they're learning watching you. Okay. So it's something that's really important. All of these factors, as a matter of fact, for leaders, these various levels of commitment that are a part of taking on some personal accountability. And so it's that whole thing of, people, their eyes on you, there are little eyes on you, and people are watching and learning as well about how you're engaging. And they're taking that as an example. And the question is, what's the example you're providing? Okay. What is the example that you're providing? So that's a good one. Okay. Number 3. Number 3 is a commitment to overcoming challenges. This is probably technically a subset of the last one, but it absolutely requires pulling out, right? Because when we're talking about the challenges, you can have challenges that lead to success. You can have challenges that lead to failure, right? So it's not that it only shows up when something, quote, goes wrong and there's a failure. Challenges can show up on either side of that. The question is, how are you identifying them? And then how are you choosing to overcome them? How are you choosing to address them? And those challenges are there, it's that whole thing about things being a part of the process, a part of the experience. And if you are taking on the responsibility, taking on an obligation, embedded in that is you saying, I am going to be committed to addressing any challenges that come along the way. Now, are people actively saying this when they take on some new role or new obligation? Most of the time, no. Most of the time, the answer is no. They're not actively thinking about it. It's not until something happens that they're like, oh my gosh, what did I just get myself into, right? I remember once, and I've told this story a few times, when I was working for one state agencies, and I was being asked to step up to a very important new leadership role that was being created. It required, taking on a huge mess of a function, reintegrating it into the agency. And I remember one person who was a dear friend, and who I still respect to this day, for asking me, for saying, hey, this could be a hot mess and this could affect your career negatively. Are you really willing to step into that? And at first it took me off guard, not because I didn't know it to be true, but because someone else recognized it and felt strongly enough about it to say something to me. And to which, like, again, I totally appreciate that. And when I was able to say, yes, I recognize that and I'm willing to move forward. When I said yes, then that meant I was aware and ready to step into that obligation to face the challenges that were going to be involved. And there were numerous challenges in that role that I mean, I could write a book about, right? But it's that difference of stepping into it actively, being fully aware versus not. Because when you're not, things can catch you off guard. It can, knock you off your feet and really impact uh, the role and the situation, but it can also impact you in terms of how you're perceived, because others may say, well, she know, or didn't she recognize that that's part of the deal? Why is she acting so surprised, right? So that's the reason why we do have to be much more active and being aware when we're stepping into situations about what the actual obligation is and what the potential challenges may be, and recognizing we're making a commitment to address those challenges. And if we're not able to adjust, to inform, to do what's necessary to honor the obligation to begin that we started off with. Okay. All right. That's number three. Number four is, last but not least, making a commitment to yourself. This is one of those, again, that we assume, but can get lost in the mix. Because you might say, well, gosh, isn't that what we're talking about when we're talking about we're committed to the goal? Not necessarily. You can be committed to a goal, this external thing, without realizing the commitment and obligation to yourself that's going to be required in the process. This is how people get burnt out, right? Because they've honored their commitment to this external thing. They've honored their commitment perhaps to the growth that's required. They've even honored the commitment to the challenges of that, of what comes up. But at some point along the way, they failed to honor the commitment to themselves to be maintained along with these other things. So they're not, oh, do this one but not that one. Like it requires a commitment to all of these things. And when you don't, this is how you get burnt out. This is how you get, hurt in the process. All of those things. What do I mean by the commitment to yourself? Well, are you honoring the commitment to the values that you want to keep? Are you honoring the commitment to your beliefs, right? Are you honoring the commitment to what's important to you as a part of this entire process, obligation, whatever it may be? Because when we don't do those things, ultimately, it affects our approach to our personal accountability, not just for this situation, but for future situations, right? We either become, a lot of times we go from one extreme to the next, right? So we may go to the extreme of, I'm not doing X anymore because, my boundaries were violated, the obligation was not clear, and as a result, I personally got damaged. Or you could go to the extreme of being very, very nitpicky about, this and this and this and this. And what we need to do is take time to engage in that reflection and to say, hey, what happened or what could happen based on what we know about this situation, based on what we know about the long-term goal and the potential process that can happen. What are the things that I need to make sure stay intact for me to be able to honor the obligation to myself throughout this process as well? Okay. And this is that thing, while we're accepting responsibility for things and our responsibility to others in organizations, in boards, in leadership roles, we also have to remember to honor the responsibility to ourselves, not to do harm to ourselves in the process, right? And that can seem like a tenuous balance to keep. But a lot of times, what we do is we put ourselves to the back burner as opposed to putting ourselves first and recognizing all of those other things need to live up to that so that we can be balanced out in the end. And I'm interested to hear your input on that, because it is something that gets a little woo and people are like, oh, but I have to do this. Well, do you really? Because sometimes we're not willing to challenge what someone says we have to do until we realize that I'm too far in and now it's doing damage to me personally and I can't get out of it, right? And so it's important to take that time, like we're discussing here, to identify what does it mean to be personally accountable, to be accountable in the various situations, the various roles and obligations that are coming up for you. Look at those 4 levels of commitment that are required: a commitment to the goal, a commitment to growth, a commitment to overcoming the challenges that may arise, and last but not least, a commitment to yourself so that you remember to honor your values, your beliefs, your boundaries in achieving the end result. Okay? That's what I got for you today. I hope that you've enjoyed that. If you have any comments, questions, put them out to me in the comments below, or hit me up in the DMs, or message or email me. Happy to engage and looking forward to it. And I hope that you have a fantastic week. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.